Okay, the way I would interpret this, now that I'm looking with fresh eyes, is that it's just describing what essentials are, in contrast to the metaphysical essences. That these essentials are only, they're just characteristics that perform a certain function with relation to human conceptualization, condensing data, performing and the characteristics that perform this function in one cognitive context may not do so in another.
What you said, this as opposed to metaphysical essences, what's the distinction there between a metaphysical essence and whatever this one is?
Well, a metaphysical essence would be in the nature of the object itself, separate from whatever your cognition would say, that there's something about the object itself inherent within it that makes it essentially this sort of thing. There's something about apples that makes it an apple, regardless of what, or that is inherently within the apple that gives it appleness, as opposed to you identifying a set of characteristics and you saying, this is the data I'm condensing into one unit.
I got it. That's later in the chapter. That's the realist theory of perception, where the essence is outside in reality. But I think in this specific section, sorry, I'm just making some mint tea. In this specific section, well, at least what perked my interest in this is that, and that I didn't fully understand, is like, okay, well, it is saying that the thing, because it's the characteristic of the thing out there in reality that exists in relation to us. But from the way I interpreted this section is that they're saying that the important characteristic, what we consider important in the thing itself, in the entity, will vary from cognitive context to cognitive context. But I couldn't see how. I was like, well, what is an example of that?
Okay.
You know what I mean?
I understand better now what you're asking. So, yeah, the examples I gave you last time were more for a specific concept, but you're just wondering about in general how, like, what kind of context might differ. I mean, like, we could think in simply in terms of, say, a context of, say, like, it's really goal oriented, so maybe how we would think of that. Like if you're trying to think of, say, if you're hunting, you would want a certain way of regarding things around you, as opposed to, say, if you were like a scientist investigating how plants in the forests operate as a system or how they grow together as an ecosystem. Which, I mean, there's some similarities that may be crossover of things they care about, but we're not just trying to find something within apples that give them some special characteristic as much as maybe we're thinking about things to eat, and that's a certain way of regarding different things we look out there in the world. And that might differ depending on if we're thinking of, say, making medicine or something, we might regard different characteristics of these various entities differently. As in, like, if we see an apple, we might identify different sort of characteristics if we're using it for medicine. And those are the sort of contexts we might have that differ, that the function we need the concepts to perform may be different.
Okay,
so
yeah, go on, sorry.
It's like we're creating concepts in a way that condense the most amount of information. And what we're doing when we identify essentials is we're attempting to find an objective way of relating what we identify as important relative to a particular context and making an objective relation with things as they are in reality, regardless of your perception of them. So, I mean, there's metaphysical facts about the world. And the way we regard a concept is not like a metaphysical fact is something you have to create with your mind.
I'm seeing, yeah, this is exactly what I was looking for. This makes sense when you said the goal-orientated context, for example, a hunter versus scientist. And I was thinking, well, I don't have a very specific, like if we had a specific concrete we could go with, that would be great. But I see how this works because the hunter might be regarding everything around him in nature in a certain way. Like he's focusing on the animals he can hunt. So there'll be, for example, he may use hunting concepts to almost interact with the environment around him. Like, okay, camouflage, that is, bison, which you shoot. I don't know. And then a medical researcher may be regarding the context completely differently with different concepts. Like he may be even grouping the things in nature differently. Like an apple could be grouped with a tree, a certain kind of tree, if it has medical properties. So suddenly that might be like the medicinal plants, and then the whole environment is conceptualized differently. Is that what you're getting at? Because that makes sense.
Yes,
Okay,
that's what I'm
cool.
trying to explain.
Yeah.
And it's nothing about those things inherently that you must categorize it this way. It's not something within the fabric of reality that makes it that it must be
Yeah.
categorized in this way. I mean, that's the difficulty about making it objective, because you wouldn't want that primacy of consciousness where you create the reality as you want it to be. We're trying to make an objective identification between these two things, or an objective relationship between the facts of the world and the concepts we create.
Mm.
That's
So,
why we talk about objectivity, because we need to maintain this aspect of creating concepts without losing track of the facts of reality, or without losing track of reality itself as it is, regardless of what we might think or get wrong about it.
um, I'm just thinking what I wanted to ask you next. So then it would be possible to say, like, you'd be classifying things completely differently depending on your context, and that what determines how you classify things is your goal, or
It's one way to do it. But
okay.
there's many more ways. It's just that's the easiest way to make it clear the sorts of distinctions I'm making about like what it is about epistemological essential versus the metaphysical essential. I mean, you could classify other ways.
Sorry, I didn't get the distinction. A metaphysical, are you talking about in a realist context or in an objectivist context? Because I thought in an objectivist context that there's no distinction between the metaphysical and epistemological essence.
Well,
It's all epistemological.
right. I just meant you're right. There is no actual distinction. I'm just saying distinguishing the two theories, I guess I should say.
Okay. Okay. Got it. How does this fit in then with tell me if I'm skipping ahead to the reason chapter or if this is more something covered in the epistemology book, but how then so essence is something causal. So causal in what sense? Because like I guess we can we can classify things differently depending on our goal. Like, suddenly a bush could be grouped with an apple, and in another context, a bush could be grouped with other animals and could be grouped with the sky as camouflage. So like what is the cause? Yeah, I'm confused then about cause, because it seems like the grouping is done by goal. Um, so like causal for what?
Yeah. Let me try to find a quote here. Let me open OPAR to check
Okay.
some of this stuff because I had it open before. I'll open the context of this. Page 112.
I can open it up.
No, 113. It's loading.
I think it's sometimes the page numbers vary on Kindle because it
It
depends on
does.
the resolution size, which is pretty
Yeah.
annoying.
Well, I can get pretty close. Let's see, page. Oh, this is where I left off anyway. Here we go.
Also, is there like I know we went with the hunter and scientist, but are there specific concepts that come to mind where that you can like you can give us an example where there's like significant um, overlap that I can have as like reference points?
I'll try to think of some. I mean, broadly speaking, we're just categorizing essentials as like what condenses data as what performs a function for human conceptualization, and the sort of concepts you develop also will change on the context. Like that's more what I was getting off about the hunter versus scientist, that you need to form different concepts based on the sort of things you're trying to accomplish or the sort of things that you're thinking about. Say a hunter would need like camouflage, as you say. But if you're just out there looking at plants, camouflage might not be a relevant concept, or it might not even need to be created in that context.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd have the concept, of course, but it doesn't do anything. I mean, we could think of what is in fact important is that is, of course, the hard part, to find out how do you know what matters most. But it's really a matter of what are you trying to look at in reality? What are you trying to explain? What are you trying to consider? Like, what are the characteristics that repeatedly pop up in that scene? Not only do they pop up a lot, but it sort of explains how the thing acts, or has something a lot to do with how the thing acts, or what it causes. Like you can think of like a chair that you're maybe if you're looking at a dog, for instance, you can look at its like how would you characterize a dog? You could consider and the essential would have to do with say what makes this thing with 4 legs and a tail and floppy ears, like what makes
for
it
us something at home like that you have as a pet.
Yeah, I mean that could be a way to start with it.
Whereas if you're in China, it could be dinner.
Yeah, even though it's a myth that they eat dogs much there, but yeah, you're right.
It's not a myth. They eat them less. It's not a myth.
Less? Okay.
It's not common. It's definitely, very, very rare. Yeah, but it's definitely a thing. Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, that's the sort of thing you might look at it differently depending on
cool.
it that way. And I mean, you might end up in very similar places. Like there's different things you could think about regarding dogs. And you could regard some things as more important than others, depending on what you're thinking about. Like, yeah, I mean, there's potential food, and that's a way to think of dogs. And you could think of like quality of meat or whatever. But
yeah,
if
that's
we're
a good
not
example.
sure,
That's a good example. Yeah, like dog could be as a concept, context varying from cognitive context to other is either food or pet.
yeah, and that might be a legitimate way of thinking about it differently. You might say certain things aren't essentials once you discover more about animals, or you could say you don't need really this special distinction, but you could have an essential that has the most to do with all of these things, like what might be in common with eating it. end up having as a pet or having it as a companion to help you hunt, or all these sort of things, you might come towards something more unifying than all these various things you might say, like it's a certain animal with a high sense of smell acuity, and that's something important about dogs.
Yeah.
That explains maybe the most of all these different ways of thinking about dogs. Or it might be something else. It might be something about the way dogs think, like they are very other dependent animals, or something like that. You could go thinking in these different directions, trying to explain the most about it, that you could say this one characteristic allows it to do this one action, do this other action. Like a dog sense of smell allows it to like get the physical activity it needs because it finds things around itself, or its sense of smell is why it allows it to be a bomb sniffing dog or a hunting dog, or what allows it to even think in the way we use our eyes, they use their nose. Like it's almost like their way of thinking. You could think of it in those terms too. Like the more you learn about dogs, you might realize there's a better essential that unifies everything you know about it. Or at least that's where you're trying to get at. It might take a long time to figure out, of course.
Okay. I wanted to ask you something. What do you think of the analogy of, it's like in this case when we're talking of switching cognitive context, it's almost like, you know, you can zip files into a RAR condensed whatever they're called, zip or whatever, RAR, I don't know.
Yeah.
But you can basically condense a bunch of files, and how you condense files and classify the different files depends on your purpose. So like if you're backing up the PC, you might just group everything together in one folder, or you might just group a few essentials. But if you're, for example, backing up documents, then you may back them up by, I don't know, specific subject, and so that of the documents. I don't know if that's a fully developed analogy, but basically you can group the files on your computer in many different ways and then zip them up. So the zip is the concept.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. The only thing I would distinguish from classification in general is that we are trying to use additional methods than some similarities. Usually the classification is usually based on some surface level similarity and nothing necessarily deep, or some set of similarities. But if we're talking about essentials and concept formation, there's a lot to do with integration and differentiation. So as a basic analogy that works, we have to keep in mind you're missing these other aspects like integration and taking a whole lot of other information in order to determine how to classify.
Okay, you mean when you say missing integration, do you mean like I'm just trying to think how that relates to my analogy. Like I'm missing right, because the documents are all potentially just separate files, and there's no you know, one file is a broader category than another file. Is it that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, for example, and it's just, it would be kind of ad hoc. Like if you're really just going through files on your computer, it might not be as meticulous as we're trying to describe here.
Yeah, okay.
That we are talking about like distinguishing different characteristics from other ones, combining certain other considerations, and like our purpose here, that there's a lot more to it as long as you keep that in mind with the analogy. But I do think you had the right idea. The analogy is a good basic idea.
Okay.
The
Yeah,
way
it's
of
not.
thinking of this.
That's probably the level of clarity that I have in my head, so
That's
I'll
fine.
be missing the details there.
Yeah, but you're aware of that, so I think it works. Your understanding, I think that's a good
Vaguely.
foundation.
vaguely, but that's okay. What's so how does this work with so I remember you were talking before about the metaphysical versus the epistemological essence, which we said is valid in a realist context. But there is something there that I think you were getting at and I missed, which is I remember the definition of like the essence is that which explains the most. So like in a human, we say the essence is rationality because when you look around at everything around us, it could like so much of it can be explained by rationality. So much of our behavior and the things we do as humans can be explained by rationality. So how does that fit in? Because then like, you know, when I'm thinking like, okay, the way I classify dog can vary depending on my goal and purpose, but then there's still some there may because I'm not fully sure of it yet, there may still be some characteristic of dog that explains most of its behavior. So how does that the fact that there is some or there may be some characteristic that is responsible for all others, how does that fit in with this idea of like classifying things in a different way depending on the cognitive context? That's complicated and a mouthful, but yeah.
I would say there's an overarching concept here where that unifies the most about dogs, but then there's certain sub considerations we could have about how we think about these things or different concepts connected to it. I'm a little unsure myself to what extent the concept itself would vary as much as just saying, since cognitive context varies, that's why we use epistemological essences, because we're not always in the same cognitive context. There is no overarching cognitive context that it's always in place at all times in all moments, other than just existence, but that's not enough to classify things or to understand things.
Yeah.
I don't have a good answer to about a specific concept varying. That you probably need to bring up elsewhere because, yeah, I have trouble with that one.
That's cool. I'll
That's a good
definitely
question.
I'll follow that up. Yeah, it was I was very that's fine. I'll leave this and we can go to the next.
Yeah.
That's my goal. You know, what's that saying? Kill the Buddha on the way. I want to get to the point where I'm asking you tons of questions you have no idea how to answer. Then I know I've made progress.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, there is one part of an old part that I want to point out is
yeah.
Pickup is saying that it is neither mandatory nor impermissible to form a concept, but optional. It's not like we have to form these concepts. We form them in order to think better, but it's not like any commandment that that these concepts must be formed or that there's the one true way to create a concept, as much as we just use the best methods we can and objective methods to come up with concepts.
Can you repeat that? Sorry, I was distracted by bringing up the quote.
More so that you don't have to make any concept if it serves no purpose, or you might find a use for a concept and you form it and create it and make sense of it, but it's nothing that must be done.
Yeah.
It's not inherently within all these objects. We have like Peacock gives an example of something called like encircleless, which it turns out as an error, but that's a way you could. Yeah. Or let me just clarify this one thing. I'm saying encircleless is to say that like this person is trying to create a concept. I mean, although it's illegitimate here, but in general, you could say that you form a concept because you see some unifying thing that could be attained, or some unifying way of thinking that could help you out.
Yeah, I will need to do more cognitive work to
Mhm.
I'll need more concepts that do the work for this to finally click and fit in place cleanly. And so that anyway, but it's super interesting.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if you could potentially, like, if you have a really good understanding of this, you might find ways to reclassify and regroup your own concepts in some different
Yes.
context and think about, and then who knows what you'll see then, because, like I'm even thinking of, in any work context, there's so much information coming in, but if you have a way to make some cognitive switch and see things from a new conceptual perspective, I don't know if you'll start picking up on all kinds of new data that will empower you in some new way. That's all super abstract, so I don't know yet if any of that is true, but
I suspect it is. I mean, I think it affects the way I think about science. I'm sure it would affect you and the way you think about finance in the future. It's just, you might not even realize you're doing it.
right.
It's just once you start thinking in another way, you start classifying things in a different way, integrating information differently, noticing different characteristics that are different, or
Yeah.
you're on the lookout for different aspects in the world.
Yeah.
And by being on the lookout, you're already like setting the cognitive context of what you're looking for. Like it might be something to do with like a certain investment strategy, thinking about, I don't know, a certain industry, a way of thinking about investing in this industry. And like you see new ways of looking at concepts you never thought of before,
Yeah.
because you're focusing on new things.
And then that in turn gives you a way to sort and organize infinite perceptual data, which you otherwise may not be able to refine into anything else.
Right.
Anyway, I don't like what level. I'm not going to say any more on that because it's still I don't have an example, so it's all just bullshit
Right.
until I have examples. Okay, should we skip to the next?
Yeah. We'll continue.
Section. All right, let me see. Okay, this is about actual reorganization of concepts. I can paste it so it shows up, but then we can read it and go to because I was doing some introspection after reading this. All right, so she's talking about what it's mandatory to conceptualize. So there are certain concretes, for example, perceptual concretes, which we deal with daily, and that's represented by first level abstractions, which is interesting because I remember us having a discussion about there just being higher and lower rather than levels. And then new discoveries of science, okay, that's probably for scientists, and new man-made objects which differ in their characteristics from previously known objects, for example, television, which I guess I would almost group with A of perceptual concretes you deal with daily. Complex human relationships involving combinations of physical and psychological behavior, for example, marriage, law, justice. I'm assuming there would be even retirement in there because that'll affect the way you think about what your goals for savings are, if you have any at all. If that is a valid concept and so on. There's so many random ones like that I could see being in the category of D and the need to conceptualize them being important. Anyway, these four categories represent existence which men have to deal with daily in many different contexts from many different aspects, whether in daily physical action or more crucially mental action and further study. The mental weight of carrying these existence in one's heads by means of perceptual images or lengthy verbal descriptions is such that no human mind can handle it. The need of condensation of unit reduction is obvious in such cases. So you're up to scratch with this section. She didn't list philosophical concepts, so that was interesting. She didn't list them as being important, like morality, rationality. Well, maybe that would fit in D, complex, but that's not a relationship, so I don't know. Yeah, she didn't actually fit in any like abstract philosophical concepts, that specifically ethical ones, like guide action.
I mean, isn't this one just specifically talking about first level abstractions anyway?
I don't know.
Or lower level. I think that's what it was trying to say. This is how I understand. wasn't quite sure about this.
It's not going to be, because it says a complex human relationships, which is not. Let me just double check that. Well, I can scroll up to see what the context is. So concept as objective, that's the section.
Yeah.
In traditional, no, maybe it's a mistake in the book. I don't know. It says it's part of the definitions of statements. Factual data, essences are not attributes marked out by nature apart from man. And then it just goes on to say, like, when it's not permissible to integrate. For example, beautiful blonde with blue eyes is 24 years old. But so
yeah. It's just saying these are the earlier level abstractions that deal with things that you use all the time, which I guess it is just interesting. She wouldn't say philosophical concepts, but you don't necessarily deal with those directly. Those are much more complex ways of thinking that, sure, they might have an implication on everyday thinking, but we're not really, most often we're going to be thinking about things, the things in front of us. Like, we're going to be talking about, like, the food in front of us, maybe certain legal relationships that are pretty common in front of you. Things that are perceptually there, like, don't require a great deal of abstraction. Since you deal with them so often, it would help to just have these concepts that condense it. Otherwise, we'd take forever to think about anything.
Yeah, I agree with that. Although I didn't get that from the context of the section. I thought that is what it's mandatory to integrate. And then I thought, oh, it's interesting they've skipped. Because I thought, based on what I'm learning so far, that it is mandatory if I want to live a good life to have, like, conceptualized some ethical system. But I don't know, maybe it's probably not important. It does seem like they missed it, because a lot of the essays are about how important having a philosophy is. So but whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see the difficulty there, but I think the point is that even philosophical concepts, we're not always dealing with them directly and completely. It's not like you're talking about causality all the time. I mean, you don't really speak in that way. I mean, yeah, you can think about it, and when you want to do more abstract thinking, you will, but it's not really part of your day-to-day thinking all the time. You're going to be thinking in more direct, simpler terms.
What about when I ask myself, what should I do now? That's always an ethical question. Like, should I be still having philosophy conversations with you? Should I still later today, how much time should I spend working? Like, a lot of those questions are abstract in nature. I can either go by feeling or have some framework for thinking about them. Yeah, so that's every day to me.
Yeah, that does make sense.
Anyway, I'm not going to make an argument against, because obviously this guy's a genius, but I don't need to. I just thought it was interesting and I wanted to get your thoughts on why they didn't put it in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
B.
Yeah, so I'll just tell you, it'll be easier, I think. I was thinking about the D. They said complex human relationships involving combinations of physical and psychological behavior. A lot of my descriptions for those are in those complex, lengthy, like law. What governments have in place to put people in place where they say you can and can't do something or punish you disobeying it. Like, I have a lot of those. That's not even, I don't have those conceptualized in a neat, compact way. Like, that's it. And then marriage, I'll think like, okay, some kind of contract. And then I have mostly images and stuff. And like, no, it's super interesting because a lot of those, I think there's tons of things that I've conceptualized in this way. She's saying you definitely shouldn't have conceptualized. So I was thinking, wow, if I then conceptualize them according to this theory, what impact would that have? So I don't know if that's a question. That's more an observation.
When you say the condensation is the word law, which you then can expand to be all that text, like, you don't need to say that blob of text every time you talk about law or every time it comes in your head. Just law, which then you can expand if you wish.
No, that is true what you're saying, but if this is what comes out from my subconscious automatically, if that's the main thing, here I'll bold it, then if you think about it, I see where this is going with this whole framework, because if I had it in a compact definition with genus differentia, then it would be way easier for my mind to mentally associate and link to the relevant concepts and other concepts that interact with it or that it depends on. Whereas if I have it grouped like this, like think about how much more taxing that is on my mind to then work through association and have clarity of connection between law and all the other relevant concepts. Do you know what I'm saying? If I for example had three words and there were three tight, important, causally significant concepts as well that help me define law, then it would be way easier for me to retain what those things are connected to. There would be like this map, this clear map in my head. Okay, law depends on this, relates to this, relates to that. And then when I'm thinking and like composing, what are they called, sentences or like a proposition or whatever it is, then it would just be way more clarity. Whereas this is like every concept is like a bag full of, I don't know, potatoes, pencils, and uranium. It's like just a jumble of random stuff.
Yeah. Well, what do you mean a mix of random stuff?
I mean, like, okay, so this is why I wanted to bring it up, because this is why I was like excited. I was like, are you thinking this is the same thing? Like, I mean, this is a lengthy verbal description. Like what I'm describing are characteristics of law.
Yes.
Like but they're not necessarily the most significant characteristics. And so when I'm retaining the concept, when I'm thinking about the concept, if I even have it properly, the things that come to me first, the way I remember it is an association-based memory on random, all these characteristics that have kind of stood out to me. But if I had instead integrated the concept in a way where the definition was essentialized and I had all the most significant concepts, that would mean that one, my mind would have less to remember because there'd be fewer things, and I could trigger association off the essential things. And then on top of that, because I've retained the essential things in my mind instead of retaining that thing, then I would also have a way easier time of retaining the connections to this concept. So like whatever politics, I don't even know. See, it doesn't even come to me. But whatever the other essential connections are, whatever concepts this depends on, law, and whatever else depends on law, would be way easier for me to mentally hold all that in one unit. And then so when I'm reading or when I'm writing a proposition, suddenly when I see law, I have this, it would be like an instant map comes up of law, what it relates to, what's significant about it. Whereas when I retain this, it's like, yeah, I'm carrying these bags, full of all this stuff. And it's like, it's not necessarily as integrated, as clean, as memorable, as clear as, anyway, that's what I was thinking.
There's a lot in there, so I'm going to try to give a general answer to that. So I think of concepts as they always contain a lot in them. We're not just trying to say there's a definition with a genus and differentia and an essential, and that's about it. When Rand says a concept, she's trying to say all the things in there. Like you're not tossing things out when you're making abstractions. It's all retained within the concept. So she's not trying to argue that this information, that you're losing information here. She's trying to make a claim that when we form concepts, we're not losing information when we form them. We're not dropping things out when we're condensing. It's more like, maybe I would compare it to like an origami swan. Like you can fold all the paper up, make it condensed and simpler as a swan, but the paper still has all the information there. You might not see the paper, obviously, and all the things it's made out of might not be obvious, but it's all been condensed into some perceivable way. And you can make those connections with many things. The matter induction and all the other concept stuff about making your concepts more clear would be more about cleaning up the concept. So if there are random associations, truly random, you might want to clean that up a little bit and try to say, well, I'll trim some of that out, but realize that that's not actually part of the concept, or things like that that would help you think better without losing all the associations and other connections with the concept.
Okay, I have a comment and a question.
Sure.
So the comment is, going back to your analogy with the paper folded into a swan, pretend on that paper there was an essay about swans and
Yeah.
you folded it into a swan. The analogy would be, in my case, I've not folded it into a swan with this essay on the swan. Instead, I've like ripped it up into random bits of shreds and like put stickers on it, and like some things related to swans, like there's a foot on there, there's like a pond, there's like, you know, it's like a collage, and then you have to figure out, okay, what's this about? Whereas yours is just a swan, and so you go, oh, swan. And then the question is, you can comment on that too, but the question is, what's your definition of law?
Law, I would say, as an organizing system in society that makes them conform to a system within society that makes people conform to respecting autonomy of others. It is a hard thing to define. Not being a lawyer makes it hard to not. It makes it, I can't really condense it so easily.
Yeah, I
mean,
don't think we need to be lawyers for that, but
yeah, just a social system that forces certain behaviors. That's the best, that forcefully enforces different behaviors.
no, you're definitely, we're both, see, it's interesting because I said
Yeah.
punish, so we're both capturing that force element. But my point is, I think your first one was more condensed and I liked it, but I can see how you're trying to capture the force part in the second definition. But my point is, like, the way you retain that in your head, and obviously, you know, a lawyer may, the cognitive context a lawyer would have will be different from ours, but us as citizens should still have a condensed, cleanly defined concept. And I agree with you that that doesn't mean that that's the only thing in our head. But what I'm saying is that, yeah, it goes back to that analogy with the like, how you pack it will help you fold more significant and important connections into memory. So like suddenly you'll be able to make the connections between law and politics, maybe even between art, maybe, and then, but if you hold the concept in a kind of very associative way where it's not necessarily, the associations are not necessarily the most essential characteristics of the concept, then it would be much more of a load on your brain to then retain, you know, the map of where, or the tree, if you're the hierarchy of the concept, the significant contextual integrations that you might make. That's, and then I that's what I was thinking about. I was like, wow, if I can then completely reconceptualize those things, who knows how I'll be thinking. That's what I was.
Yeah, I think that sounds better. It was a bit confusing at first, but now I think you didn't word it entirely clearly. But now I think you captured the idea better now.
Good.
I think that sounds right.
Okay, so then, yeah, it's something. Anyway, that was, I wasn't even a question originally. I was like, because I've observed myself thinking that way, and then I wrote this. I imagine a lot of others would be similar. So then a lot of our thinking is undercut, but it's, we still live, we're still functioning, but like maybe a map, who knows? I guess it's like that same, what's that concept of like, you don't know, like you can say everything's working fine, but you don't know what you've missed out on because it's invisible. Just like, you know, what is it? The broken window fallacy in economics.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, comment, not a question, but.
Yeah, this sort of stuff really interests me. It's a lot to do with the psychology research I want to do. How you relate concepts together, how you associate them, what makes one concept activate another. Why would you be reminded of one concept when you think of law? Like, why does your mind go a certain direction? Or how does your mind make connections with other ideas? So it's a way, how do you condense all this information and connect it to other information? What's the way our mind unifies and condenses all this information that we can store so much information in our head, access it, and still be able to think?
Yeah, I'm interested in that too. So it's perfect that that's your research interest. And by the way, that's part of why I'm recording this, because I do want to ultimately do something like a complete reorganization, which, I mean, there's more in this section which touches on that. A complete mental reorganization, and then see, like, if I go back, let's say 2 years or a year to a video, and I'm like, whoa, look at this marked change in the way I speak and think. That's why because if there's no achievement or there's no difference, then yeah, what? Okay, cool. But if there's like, you have an actual physical, concrete,
Yeah.
evidence of it, that would be amazing. But
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
All right, so, this is your favorite example with the beautiful blondes with blue eyes, 5 foot. I don't even know what this measurement is, 5'5" or whatever, and 24 years old. Yeah.
This example always sticks out in my head. That Rand's example, like, it always sticks out to me. That's how I remember it even.
Let me just see, because we don't have much time left. I'll see if there's any other random loose ends that are not as long as this, because I don't want to get too deep into something new. Yeah, you brought this example up, I remember a while back as well. Let's see. Maybe we can just go into random questions and then just swap them away if they're too long. But like, I'll just see if there's a specific. It's more so, is there specific texts or parts of books that cover these questions? So one is, I was always wondering, like, because I haven't gotten onto objectivist epistemology yet, but like, why does there have to be something that explains the most about a thing? Why can't there be multiple things that explains just as much as each other? Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yes.
Okay, humans have rationality. All right, it's true, rationality explains most of our behavior, but then can't there be some other, why wouldn't there be able to be some other entity where there's 5 different things that explain about the same?
My first thought is then you would just integrate those two. Like, it seems like you would always be able to, like, if there's 2 essences you're saying, why wouldn't you be able to condense them into one, like combine them? Like, is there some reason that you can't combine them? Because this idea of condensing, it just seems to be more to do with you're condensing things as much as you can, and you can condense it to a single thing, and that's the most you can condense something. So that's why there's one essence.
I'd need to, I can tell, I don't know, because I need to try and think of an example, but I can't think of anything. It's more like, this is all just abstract, grammatically correct stuff, but I don't know if it's real or not. Like, I'm trying to think of what would have multiple, nothing even comes to mind, so I don't know. But then again, I don't know when I think of other stuff, what the thing that explains the most about it is necessarily, so.
It's more that the objective and the point is to condense it as much as possible. It just seems like we just follow that. The claim is also that if you somehow identify 2 essentials, what you should do is combine those into one somehow. But since I can't think of an example either. So that's the most we can do with that one.
What about explaining why you love someone? Like, I don't know if that's a concept though, but like, there may not be one thing. if you love someone, there may not be one overarching thing that is the cause of you loving them. There may be multiple things in combination that are just as significant as each other. And so
that is one reason I wouldn't call that a concept.
okay.
I mean, I agree with you. It's not really a concept.
Oh.
Also, partly because it's not unified into a word. I think Rand does say elsewhere that if it's more than one word, well, it's not a concept. It's multiple concepts, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But it's not a condensation the way a concept is.
Right. Okay. Well, I need to